I have to give a disclaimer. I was a volunteer for Alan Steelman in 1972. I wanted to do something for our environment. And so my Aunt Christine recommended that I get in touch with Ned Fritz. And Ned Fritz said, you need to join Alan Steelman's campaign. And I basically handed out, as I recall, knocking on doors, putting in flyers. And if they answered the door, they usually shut the door as fast as they saw me. Until I could tell in October, people were really getting interested in this campaign. I could tell there was a difference. There were no polling data. It was my observation. But I knew he was going to win. We went to some kind of campaign event, and I was a pair of hands. I forgot what I did. Doesn't matter. It was a menial task. I remember putting stuff in envelopes and putting labels on postcards and that kind of thing. Now, with that said, we were at a campaign event, and as I recall, it was a women's program of some sort, mainly women there. And one of the ladies asked the candidate, Steelman, if he was elected, does he mind if she calls him Congressperson Steelman? And he quickly responded with no notes, no thinking it over. You can call me Congressperson Steelperson if you want to. And I thought that was so quick on the feet. And the women just cheered like the Cowboys had just won at the Super Bowl. I knew he was going to win. But it wasn't an easy task. He wore out 3 pairs of shoes to get there. So it is my honor to introduce Alan Steelman, Honorable Alan Steelman. He was served in Congress for 2 terms. And then Amy Martin, who's written several books, numerous magazine articles, and she is one of them. She has done, she doesn't like me to say this, but she's in one of the top 10 people who've done more for saving the environment in Texas than anybody I know. And she has her books for sale at the back at the end. And then after the end of their presentation, we'll have the documentary, which is really intriguing and really interesting.
Well, hello there. My name's Amy Martin. I have been a journalist for, a few decades here. I was also Dallas Times Herald person, but I pretty much worked for all the publications in Dallas and a few national ones as well. My latest book is Wild DFW, Explore the Amazing Nature Around Dallas-Fort Worth. It really is a fabulous book. It covers Dallas, Tarrant, Collin, and Denton counties. So there is a whole section on Collin County nature. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about the Trinity River itself. And it is the longest river completely contained in the state of Texas. If you're not familiar with it, the Clear Fork merges into the West Fork in Fort Worth, and then the West Fork tools along until it gets to around downtown Dallas, a little bit northwest of downtown Dallas, and it merges with the Elm Fork. And it's at that point, kind of around Irving, that it becomes the Trinity River itself. And the Trinity River really meanders a lot. It's a very slow, kind of a shallow river for pretty much its entire length. Very, very deeply wooded for most of its length, but it does pass through some prairie area for a while. And it meanders lazily through rural East Texas. There's really not many cities along it for most of its distance. And it skirts gets close to, when it gets into southeast Texas, it skirts the western edge of the Big Thicket. And then there is Lake Livingston, which is the only point on the Trinity River that is impounded for a reservoir, huge reservoir that provides the water for Houston. And then it tools on down to the Gulf, and it ends in the Bay of Galveston, where it helps create one of the largest and most important estuaries in the United States. And it's also, if you've ever eaten Gulf shrimp, that's where the Gulf shrimp comes from. So people have been trying to navigate the Trinity River since the 1800s, pretty much starting in 1880s. And they had barges and steamships, and they were trying to get them up the river, and they could get about up to Palestine when the river started really getting shallow. And when it went into the Blackland Prairie area, it's a very clay soil, and so trees were constantly falling into the river. And it was full of snags, and in fact, these giant rafts of logs, fallen trees, would form. So it was very difficult to navigate up that way. Then the railroads showed up in the late 1800s, and, well, everybody wanted to ship their stuff by train because it was fast and it was easy and you wouldn't get your stuff wet. And so they had a monopoly on things, and boy, did they charge some pretty high rates for railroad shipping. And so a lot of the business people kept pressing the government to make the Trinity River navigable, as if such a thing could happen, as if you could make the snags and the shallow water go away. And in the late 1800s, the federal government did a study, and they said, no way, Jose. This river is shallow, and it's full of snags, and quite frankly, there really isn't enough goods for you to ship to make it worth the millions that it's going to take to do this. So you would think it was over, but these boosters of navigation were not going to give up, so they soldiered on. And in the early 1900s, they got the federal government to spend $1 million, which was a lot back then, in 1900, to put in some locks and dams here in the North Texas, Dallas County area. That didn't work very well. It really didn't help the navigation at all. And so the federal government said, all right, we're done. Actually, it was $2 million. And really what happened was that the federal government said, hey, you canal boosters, cough up some bucks. And the canal boosters said, no. And the federal government said, okay, we're out. And they pulled out in 1921. Well, 1930s came along, and the canal boosters were added again. And they said, you know what? We can make the Trinity navigable. All we have to do is straighten it. Now, this is a very meandering river, lots of bends. And so they said, well, all we have to do is take out 200 miles of its length, about 1/3 of its length, and make it completely straight. And then, well, you know what would make it navigable? We'll put in 20 locks and dams. The 3 and 4 locks and dams in North Texas, that wasn't enough. So we're going to put in 20, and we're going to put them in all along the river. And that was going to it's going to race the river completely, because it was going to create a series of what are called slack water reservoirs. Reservoirs that are very shallow, and they really are not good for much of anything besides pushing a barge through. And Ned Fritz, the most eminent environmentalist that Texas has ever had, he's watching this whole thing and going, surely this is not going to happen. Well, then the 1940s came around, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers decides that we're going to go into the reservoir building business, and it became the thing to do. We were going to build reservoirs. And in the 1950s, Texas went, that is such a good idea. I tell you what we should do. We should dam all of the rivers in East Texas, create giant reservoirs, and ship that water to West Texas and create an agriculture industry. Ned went ballistic, and he got together with some people in Austin that were, basically they were mostly Republicans, and they were not for all of these tax expenditures. So he got together with them, and he killed what was called the Texas Water Plan. So in the mid-50s, though, watching this dream go away, the Trinity River Authority had been formed from canal boosters, and they decided that, because they had governmental authority when they were formed, they had decided that we're going to go after reservoirs again, and so they start promoting the idea of reservoirs in North Texas. And the canal boosters then generated another study, and miraculously, all of a sudden, the Trinity River has plenty of water. And it's actually deep, isn't it? And those snags, if we just pull the snags out, they won't fall in again, okay? And we have unlimited commerce that we can ship on this canal that we want to build. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers went, all right, sure, we'll take it. Yeah, we actually would like to get to building stuff. So they said that they signed up on the study. And, this study said, well, we're going to really widen the canal. And we're going to make it like a mile wide when you put in all of the adjacent infrastructure that has to go with it. And we're going to channelize the Elm Fork. Don't know why, but they decided they would channelize the Elm Fork, and they would channelize Duck Creek all the way into Garland, and they would put a little port up there. And so then they said, and we're going to put in 2 big turning basins, which are essentially ports for the barge canal. Interestingly enough, those 2 ports and turning basins were going to be on the land of the biggest canal boosters. Just by coincidence. How about that? In the 60s, it gets crazier, absolutely crazier. The boosters finally admit that they don't have enough water to float a barge, particularly on the West Fork. And so they say, I know what we'll do. We'll build a big reservoir called Tennessee Colony, and we'll build that on the Trinity in East Texas, where they have a lot of rainfall. And we'll pipe that water hundreds of miles, by the way, uphill, to Lake Benbrook. And we'll put the water in Lake Benbrook, and it will go into the Clear Fork, and then it will go into the West Fork. Voila, we've got water. Folks, if your river needs a river, your plan is probably not very good. So then President LBJ in the 60s decides he's all for this idea. It's Texas, it's business. He's, okay, let's go for it. And they start construction of this thing called the Wallaceville Dam at the mouth of the Trinity, right by the Gulf. And they were going to create a giant reservoir right there at the Gulf. And it was going to kill the estuary. And it was going to basically kill shrimp fishing. But it was making somebody happy, and they went ahead and started construction. At this point, the cost of the canal is reaching $1 billion, and that's not including the turning basins, and that's not including the price of raising all the bridges along the Trinity River. Still, it's $1 billion in 60s dollars, which is like $12 billion. It's kind of crazy. Ned, at this point, is like, okay, I'm in, I'm all in, I gotta fight this. Well, in the 1960-72, the cavalry arrives. And that is the federal government. President Richard Nixon forms the EPA. And they also passed the Clean Water Act. And they also passed the Environmental Policy Act. And the Environmental Policy Act requires any big construction, particularly big construction that's on federal land, and all rivers belong to the Army Corps of Engineers. Anyone that does that, they have to have an environmental impact statement. So now Ned has something to work with. And the Texas Parks and Wildlife is like, oh God, this is really gonna happen. And they call the plan ecological devastation. Governor Dolph Briscoe forced them to retract that statement. So, but the federal government study forced the Tennessee Colony Reservoir to be halted while they did a study on it. And then in 1972, a bunch of interesting coalition, Audubon Society, Sierra Club, the shrimp fishermen, and a sportsman's group decide to file suit and force the Wallaceville Dam to stop. And then the fight really goes on when something happens in Dallas, and that's this young upstart, this absolutely unknown dude, this whippersnapper who wants to be a politician, throws a complete monkey wrench into the booster plans, and he says he's going to run against one of the biggest canal boosters there is, and that's Earl Cabell. So that brings us up to the year 1972.
Alan, why did you choose to run for office in Dallas, knowing Earl Cabell was a former mayor and his father was a former mayor? And they owned grocery stores that everybody was familiar with. In other words, they were well entrenched.
Yeah, actually, for those of you who don't know, the Cabell Minute Markets, the ones that Tom is referring to, later became the Southland Corporation and the 7-Eleven company. So this all started with the Cabell. That's just an historical aside. Well, 1972, as Amy has mentioned, really was a pivotal year in many respects. Earth Day had been proclaimed by President Nixon 2 years earlier. To quote a famous Bob Dylan song, the times were changing, although not many in the power structure here realized the times were changing. In 1972, the population of Allen was 800 people, 8,000 people. And I was looking at some constituent mail just to move ahead a moment earlier as I was preparing for this, and I would get letters from Allen marked Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, Route 1, Box 735, Allen, Texas. So it was still very much a rural area. And so the population was starting to grow, though, and in the overall Dallas-Fort Worth area. So 1972, this pivotal year that Amy was referring to, which I now would like to elaborate a bit on, the term Metroplex was coined to start referring to this growing metropolitan region. The Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, the ribbon wasn't actually cut until 1973, but we knew we had a world-class international airport, very appropriate for the economy that evolved here over time. So a little bit of a long way around, Tom, to your question. So I just was greeting some of you coming in, and I can see some of you, just giving you the eyeball test, might have been a voting age in those days, and might remember the civic and political landscape at that time bears no resemblance whatsoever to today. Today, while the Metroplex is home to quite a large number of Fortune 500 companies, the top executives are generally expatriates, meaning from other places in the country, here to do a job, get promoted, and move to some other state. So they have very little interest in the political and civic affairs of the Dallas-Fort Worth area now. Again, bearing no resemblance to what we were facing in this pivotal year, 1972. There was something called the downtown business establishment that had really been in place for the most of the history of the city. The legendary Mayor R.L. Thornton had a famous mantra: "Keep the dirt flying, boys." It meant, grow, grow, grow. Not paying much attention to what type of growth was being attracted. And we had the Citizens Council downtown made up of the 10 or so leaders who literally chose who ran for mayor, who ran for city council, who ran for the legislature, who ran for Congress, and who didn't really have much patience with anyone who questioned that. So the downtown power structure, as Amy was referring to, was very favorable toward the canal, and they felt that the stars had finally aligned. President Johnson had been president up to 1968. Jim Wright of Fort Worth was chairman of the House Public Works Committee, the committee that authorized the canal, and George Mahon of Lubbock, another Texan, chairman of the Appropriations Committee that would actually fund it. So they thought their time had finally come. So, Tom, to your question, forgive me for taking a bit of a way around, but I thought some context might be helpful. I had gone to Baylor. I was 29 years old when I decided to run.
You were a whippersnapper.
And me from Arkansas, that does qualify being a whippersnapper, I think. So elitism has always kind of gone up my nose, as I'm sure it has many of you. And to live here and to just have to read the paper every day about the decisions that were being made downtown, about how the rest of us are going to live, just didn't sit very well with me. And so I decided to run, and I had already announced as a part of my campaign platform a platform of let's take a breather from the growth at any cost syndrome, which had the full support of all the boys downtown, and let's do some land use planning and do better planning on streets, highways, and other things that affect the quality of life here.
You radical.
Yeah, that didn't go down too well with the boys downtown. And then, again, this pivotal year, 1972, I had a visceral reaction to the canal. I did not understand the economics of it. And so Ned Fritz and Mary Wright of the Sierra Club, Jim White, an economics professor, a theology professor from SMU, and Don Smith, an economics professor, approached me and laid out the overall environmental and economic case. And it was a compelling case. It was going to cost $1.6 billion. Now, as the crow flies, it's 250 miles from Dallas to the Gulf. As the crow flies, it's 700 winding miles through oxbows and bends and so forth. So the straightening of the canal, as Amy was referring to, was going to be a colossal cost item as well as a very destructive environmental item. So I decided to jump into the deep water, and I felt that there was enough animosity toward the downtown business group. My congressional district at the time was all within Dallas County, so it was Mesquite, Garland, the Park Cities, Pleasant Grove, South Dallas, Lakewood, and White Rock. So I felt that there was probably enough animosity that the same animosity that I felt. And so it was actually 5 pair of shoes, Tom, not 5, not 3. So I actually decided to work full time. I knocked on 26,000 doors. And this incumbent Earl Cabell, again, the chosen candidate, former mayor, who had been 5 terms in Congress now, no Republican had ever gotten more than 40% against him before. And the virtue or the demonstration of the effect of a shoe leather campaign, I got 56% to 44%. Again, a lot of that had to do with the voters just being tired of all the boys downtown, and the barge canal issue, which was front and center of my campaign.
Well, you know, you chose well in East Dallas because East Dallas has had a long history of challenging the status quo and wanting to be heard. When Dallas went to single-member city council districts, that was led by East Dallas, and because they felt like every region needed to be represented, because before that it was the Dallas Citizens Council that chose all of the at-large city council members. So they were really primed and ready to go. But I think the thing that really struck me the most about your challenging campaign was this different vision. You know, here you had these canal boosters, and they had this view of Dallas as an industrial city that they felt like only an industrial city could make money. And here you were looking forward and going, well, we've got an airport, and Texas Instruments is being developed, and, you know, do we really want to be dirty? Do we really want to be Pittsburgh? You know, do we really want to have a lot of industry and, you know, barges that are excreting pollution and, you know, petroleum products into the canal? Do we really want this going right past downtown Dallas? And it was really a shockingly different vision for what Dallas was going to be.
Well, it was an idea, the idea of the canal, as Amy was referring to, was really given birth even before the turn of the century, when the business model, or the model for so-called successful towns and cities during those days, was you got to be on a railroad, which made sense, and if you could be on a port, if you could be a port city, be on a large body of water, that even made it better. So the city fathers, again, now we're talking about in the early 1900s, the city fathers, being the ambitious men they were, felt we've got a river here, and we'll figure out a way to get barges up and down this thing till we get to Houston. And so it was given birth then, and it made more sense then than it certainly did as the economy and the city evolved. By 1972, our business base was finance, insurance, technology, logistics, Texas Instruments, EDS, Sam Wiley's companies. We had quite a number of companies that fell within those 4 or 5 basic white-collar categories that did not fit at all with us being a port city any longer and the type of industry that would attract. So, Amy, you could have added Houston to your list there, in addition to Pittsburgh.
Yes.
So, we talked a lot in the campaign about the choice we're making here. Again, a very pivotal year, because had this choice gone differently, the so-called Metroplex would be a different place today.
Yeah,
So
and we also had the interstates coming in.
Exactly.
Which changed things. And Texas Instrument was such a game changer. I mean, the invention of the chip was here in Dallas, and we want to be an industrial port city. It didn't make any sense at all.
So we talked about making the choice in this election, ladies and gentlemen, of the kind of city and the kind of North Texas that we want to be.
I would say that my personal involvement with the campaign was based upon the devastation the canal would have on the woods, the surrounding natural areas, and also I just know that even at a young age, that cost estimates are always lower than the actual cost. Like she mentioned the bridges and so forth. That $1 billion was what I call an artificial number. And we're talking $72. That would be like 20 billion today. Add that, it's really 100 billion. And have you noticed after every rain, the street crews are out there fixing the roads? Imagine what they would have been doing after every time it flooded the canal.
Yeah. They never took into account the flooding that would happen to the canal, and where that water would go. It was kind of a crazingly not very well thought out idea. And the thing that made Ned's coalition so significant about this was his coalition. He put together all of the environmentalists, but when he first started out his campaign against the canal, he told them, look, y'all be a little quiet, because I'm going to go over here and work with these SMU people. And he got this professor, Don White, he punched so many holes in that budget. He punched so many holes in their arguments and their economic arguments. He was amazing. And then you had James White, who as a theology professor had this kind of gravitas that was like, he wasn't a very good speaker, but you did look at him and listen to him and think, now he's not a liar.
We thought we needed God on our side, a theology professor.
Right. And then Ned started bringing in, Ned always said, and it's a joke that he had, because Ned was a lifelong Democrat. He said, always have a Republican in your pocket. And so he was very pleased to have Alan Steelman on the team. But he went out and got this shark. And the shark's name was Henry Fulcher. And Henry Fulcher, man, he had his shiny shoes, he had his suit, and he took Don White's information and he started hammering this argument. And he's Henry Fulcher. He was a very successful importer, and so people were going to listen to this fellow. The group was called Citizens Association for a Sound Trinity. It was actually formed, I think, in James or Don's basement, and they started putting together points. And this was Ned's specialty. Ned would just drill it down to its absolute essentials. And he picked up one of Alan's phrases, which was billion-dollar ditch, And he came up with another phrase, which was our taxes, their canal. And that really just synopsized it, is that you are underwriting their businesses. This really isn't going to benefit you. And so Cost was a really remarkable group. And they were classic Ned Fritz approach. They papered the town with flyers. You talk about Alan's shoe leather. These people must have worn out lots of tennis shoes. He's wearing fancy leather shoes, But these people were out there in hiking boots and tennis shoes, and they were knocking on doors, and they were going out to the colleges and getting the colleges involved. In fact, it was who was that fellow? Bush. His last name is Bush. I think it's Jim Bush from Waxahachie, and he had started the campaign against the canal. And so Ned said, you come on into our ranks. And Ned brought this group together, and at the same time, Ned is busy. he is so busy at this point because he was at that point nailing down the final legal language to create the Big Thicket National Preserve. And those last years before the thicket was preserved in federal legislation, those were tough because he was having to work with a lot of politicians that they didn't really want this preserved, but he was insistent. And so he was really busy. And this coalition understood that, and they basically said, we're going to challenge you, Ned. You gave us the data, and we're going to get over there and get after it. So it was really an amazing time, these canal opponents who were dismissed, denigrated. Alan had mentioned in some of his writings that they had had a huge rally outside of downtown Dallas. I think it was in some facility. And they had performers and they had speakers, and they just couldn't trash the canal opponents enough. And it turned on them. They had this guy, what was that guy's name?
Tom Eunice.
Yes. Well, let's just say Tom did not have a charming personality. And he started rubbing people the wrong way. They looked at him and they went, you're arrogant and you're hiding something. And then they looked at Ned's group and they looked at Alan and they went, y'all are working so hard, and particularly you, Cost, you got no dog in this fight. You know, you are working so hard, and I think they were outspent 10-1. I think Cost had a budget of $4,000. You know, that was it. And it was all spent on printing. It was all spent on printing flyers and brochures and bumper stickers. The bumper stickers were a thing back then.
Amy just went, so we've now fast forwarded to the bond election. So I got elected in November '72.
Oh, and that set everything
which
off.
really was an earthquake to the downtown boys because, again, I was 29 years old. Ned had not quite reached the iconic status at that stage that he would later. And Ned had this funny idea, which even I thought was strange at the time. He was such an environmentalist and believed in forest and the things that grow green, he wouldn't mow his yard. And he lived in North Dallas. And of course, they said, what's with this crazy guy? You know, he's filing these lawsuits, he's an environmentalist. He won't mow his damn yard. You know, so there we had this 29-year-old me, this crazy guy that wouldn't mow his yard. And so when we get then into the bond election, which was in March, 3 months following my election, they had this big, at Market Hall, Amy, downtown, over 1,000 people in attendance and bands playing and Tom Eunice berating us. And then they bought full-page ads. We had two downtown papers at the time, 2 full-page ads saying, the Trinity Canal, who's for it, who's against it? You know, who's for it? Governor Doss Briscoe, former Governor John Connolly, former Governor Preston Smith, Senator John Tower, Senator Lloyd Benson, every Republican, every Democrat, state, federal, and local listed. And then on our side, Ned Fritz, who again, just the name itself because of the yard was controversial. Professor, notice the wolf whistles here, Professor Don Smith, Professor Jim White, zero population growth, the Sierra Club, Congressman Alan Steelman, 4 of us on the other side.
Yeah, dismissing Ned Fritz was their biggest mistake.
A little comment about Ned Fritz. When a squirrel took an acorn and planted it in his front yard and the sapling grew, the city of Dallas would show up and say, you got to cut that down, that's a weed. He said, that's a tree, let me educate you about the difference.
He did a lot of educating.
But I saw after you were elected, I saw a major difference in the media. KERA,
yes,
instead of being on the background and being neutral, started to being very involved in the Trinity Project.
And that was the era of the newsroom with some of the, I can't remember, I'm drawing a blank on the name, but Bob Ray Sanders was part of it. They had some really...
Lee Cullum and Darwin Payne.
Yes,
Billy
they had some
Porterfield,
big names, and they started just talking about it. They started discussing it almost every night. And then something really significant happened in October as well before he got elected. And that was that at one of the meetings for channelizing Duck Creek and Garland, Tom Eunice happens to let slip that, oh, well, actually, you know, all of these counties along the Trinity River, you're going to have to cough up $150 million. And the counties were like, say what? We didn't think we were going to have to pay for any of this. We're like okay with it as long as it's a federal money, which is actually their money. They weren't getting that. But as long as it's federal money and your money, we're okay with this idea. But you want us? And Ned goes, oh, there's more. No. What they're asking for is not just $150 million to start, but they're asking for the right to tax you ad infinitum. So when people have that kind of leeway, they're not going to be very good with your money. You know, if they have an unlimited budget, well, there is no reason for them to save. And so that completely changed the debate. That totally energized cost, and they went, my goodness, you know, the tide is starting to turn for us.
So the final nail in the coffin was the bond election in March of '73. This is the 50th anniversary, by the way, of that vote. Amy and I had a big celebration back in March.
Well, let's mention that KERA set up a town hall in January between Alan Steelman and Jim Wright. Jim Wright didn't show. He was like, I don't want to debate him. No, I don't want to do that at all.
So in spite of the full-page ads and the big rally downtown and all the forces aligned against us, there has never been before nor since a coalition like what came together to really become the David in this David and Goliath story. So we carried 56% of Dallas County, carried 9 of the 16 counties, the majority, and a majority of the vote. Yeah. Only one county downstream voted for it.
It was really significant. The up here in Dallas, because we had Ned and because we had Alan and we had this media coverage, and we had this really significant thing that happened in February before the bond election. The Dallas Morning News, which has always been very anti-union, came out with an expose that showed that the Teamsters Retirement Fund, the thing that Jimmy Hoffa went to jail for, was busily buying up money for a competing barge turning basin. And that barge turning basin was going to basically decimate the great Trinity Forest. Now, that wasn't very much concern of Dallas Morning News, but it was very much a concern for Ned Fritz and his environmental coalition. But when that came out, people really went, oh man, the money is funny with these people. I am just not sure about that. And then also, I got to tell the story about Alan, and Ned Fritz is totally associated with the Big Thicket. And so, the Trinity forms one of the borders of the Big Thicket. And so he convinces Alan to come down to Houston and canoe the Trinity River down there to show the media in Houston, which was really on the edge of supporting the canal or not. And Ned thought, we're going to do a classic Ned Fritz publicity stunt, and Alan's going to come down and we're going to canoe. And it's February, and it's like, sure, it's warm in Houston, right? Oh no, it's snowing, And there's no cell phones, and there's really no, there's hardly any phone service anywhere where they were going to be. And Ned and Alan are about to get into their canoes, and the media is there, and they start arriving, and they go, hey, did you hear the news? And Alan's like, what news? And went, the Wallaceville Dam, it's over. The judge has halted construction of the Wallaceville Dam. And then Alan's like, great, let's go back home. It's cold, it's snowing in Houston. What are we doing down here? And that end of the Wallaceville Dam, where they forced them, said, you got to stop everything and do an environmental impact statement on this thing. That really took the wind out of the sails of the canal proponents, because they knew, even up here in North Dallas, that it wasn't going to go through without the Wallaceville Dam. It could not happen. The canal could not happen without the Wallaceville Dam. So then the bond election, the referendum, essentially starts, happens on March 13th, and it was really exceptional because it won up here in North Texas. It lost, particularly in the county where the town of Liberty is, which was really counting on the Wallaceville Dam and the canal happening. But we had this really interesting thing that's not talked about much, which is there's a whole lot of Trinity between North Texas and Houston, and that was all very rural. Do you remember Hee Haw? Do you remember John Henry Falk of Hee Haw? He was such a raconteur, and he got together with his rancher friends, and they started working all of that rural area in between these two endpoints, and they basically just said, these city folks are coming for your money. You want that? Do you really want that? And that really is what made sure that those counties did not swing for the canal, because they were swinging for it until John Henry Falk jumped in and went, you city folks, they're coming for your rural money. And they listened.
Before we close, I'm going to let Alan sum it up, but all these beautiful images you see in the screen,
yes.
they wouldn't have occurred if it had been for Alan Steelman.
Yep.
And Ned Fritz.
And Ned
all
Fritz.
the other volunteers.
Yeah. And there's a lot of other things that really wouldn't have happened either. And I pointed this out to Dallas Institute of Humanities, and they were like, But anyway, some of the cultural things that we think about, like the design district, that wouldn't be. Trinity Groves, that wouldn't be. The Trinity levee trails, that wouldn't be. All of the 100 miles of Trinity trails in Fort Worth, that would not be. And also, there were 2 African-American towns that were going to be obliterated by this canal, and that's Joppy and Banton. And they were going to be just, this canal was just going to plow through their heritage, their communities, their everything. And it's kind of crazy to think that, for instance, in Arlington, the heart of Arlington is River Legacy Parks. That wouldn't be. You know, the list goes on and on. And the Great Trinity Forest mostly would not be. So there were so many things that were saved by defeating the canal that we take for granted now.
Congressman?
Okay, let me wrap up. I've got a book of poetry coming out in a month, by the way, and I wrote a poem that'll be in this book called The Epic Battle for the Trinity. Probably a good way to conclude. Epic the dream, epic the battle. This special river, La Santissima Trinidad, the most holy Trinity. Rivers of the Lone Star, exploring and evangelizing the early Spaniards, navigating and naming the Brazos, the Colorado, the Neches Nueces, San Jacinto, the Pecos, the Sabine, the Guadalupe, the San Antonio, and the Rio Grande. Headwaters north for some winding east, others west. They christened one, flowing from the north almost from the border, meandering through oxbows and bends all the way to the Gulf, 700 miles. Those who followed the early pioneers, the city fathers, men of drive, ambition, and vision, they adopt a mission. The Trinity River is ours now. We'll make it one of the best. Make it a canal for 77 dreams of ports, steamboats, and barges. Keep the dirt flying, grow, 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 be large. From Dallas, streaming through virgin forest, verdant prairie, trails, woodlands, the big thicket, replete with songbirds, hawks, thrushes, elms, oaks, pecans, Texas buckeyes. All this, though secondary to the port city dream. Then decades pass, region evolves, technology, banking, finance, airplanes and interstates. Earth Day, new forces now at play, concern about all things green. The fathers, for generations rooting from the top, face now an existential threat. A coalition not seen before or since gives voice to the question and the choice. Industry with mills, refineries, and pollution, or a different solution. The Trinity and its flow, christened as special so long ago, not to be disturbed with concrete dams and levees. Our voice shall prevail, the people spoke, a resounding no, a death blow to this old dream now obsolete and outdated. May this special dream flow ever to the Gulf.
Abso-friggin-lutely. Wonderful poem, wonderful poem.
We'll show you a KERA documentary. It's fabulous, and at the end of the documentary, we'll be available for questions. Thank you for listening.
I know 3 unspoken accidental monument to the billion-dollar ditch. Interstate 45 going south, those bridges halfway up the sky because they're built in anticipation for that ditch. Also, you take State Highway 31 between Corsicana and Athens at Trinidad, same story. Could we put a historical medallion to tell what that foolishness was about so we won't forget?
Any questions, comments, protests?
I just think that we can't forget the power of an individual and also the power for fighting for something bigger than yourself, bigger than profit, bigger than everything. You know, like Kevin pointed out, this river's going to outlast us. And it deserves our respect, and I hope we continue to respect it. There are threats to the river that are still coming up. There are still plans to do some canalization up here in North Texas, and we have to be vigilant and make sure that the river can continue.
Can I say one thing? I want to give all of you, please take a look at Amy's book. This is more than just me trying to sell her book. You'll see a lot of what was saved by the vote 50 years ago. We wouldn't have a lot of what's in Amy's book had the vote gone a different way. So she's done a masterful job and has written a book that's going to be around for a long, long time.
Thank you.
Question from the audience.
Where could we learn more about Ned Fritz?
I was about to get to that. Ned Fritz Legacy is a project that is ongoing. And it's at nedfritz.com, particularly if you'll look for the section Ned in a Nutshell, and you'll get an idea of what this one man actually did manage to accomplish. It is his biography. It is ongoing, and I hope you will visit it and sign up for our newsletter and stay in touch with us.
We had a question from our television audience, and this man was watching from Arkansas, and he wants to know how growing up in Arkansas influenced your environmental policies.
Well, it's actually a good question. I grew up in a small town, Arkadelphia, on the both the Washita and the KERA rivers, and I fell in love with rivers then. And so, and Arkansas, as you know, is known as the natural state. The Buffalo River, we managed to get in North Arkansas. We managed to get put into the Wild and Scenic River system to be set aside so no further development could take place in 1972. So that's a good question, and it does have an awful lot to do with with the early years of my life and what formed me.
Thank you all for coming.